Homer. We're the only station with the balls to talk professional wrestling. Now, let's go ringside with former professional wrestler and instructor Les Thatcher.
Hey, we're back for the second hour of Wednesday night main event. I'm Les Thatcher along with ring announcer Patrick Black, Dr. Love, and our very, very special guest of my longtime personal friend, J.J. Dillon from the WCW. Real quick, Patrick, let's hit the upcoming area events.
All right, Saturday, October 31st, Hamilton, Ohio, National Guard Army HWA Halloween Party. 6 big matches. Starting at 8 p.m., featuring WWF superstar Al Snow in the Head versus the expert Brian Taylor, managed by GQ Masters III, plus candy for the kids and door prizes for best contest, judged by Al in the Head.
Best costume, Patrick, not best contest. Anyway, Saturday, November the 7th, Blanchester, Ohio, the FOE Hall, 7:30 p.m., featuring lady wrestlers Debbie Combs, Candy Devine in a mixed tag team match, plus Chip Fairway, Shark Boy, and Livewire Sean Casey, the expert, and others.
Saturday, November 14th, Aberdeen, Ohio, the Municipal Building, 7:30 p.m., sponsored by the Lions Club, featuring Tarek the Great, Cody Hawk, the Extremist, Guy Quebec, and others.
Tuesday, November the 17th, Danny Davis's Ohio Valley Wrestling begins a weekly event at the Louisville Gardens. That's every Tuesday night, beginning the 17th of November, featuring stars from OVW, HWA, WWF, and more.
Wednesday night, November 18th, WWF returns to Cincinnati, Ohio at the Gardens, bell time 8 p.m.
And HWA brings wrestling to Lynchburg, Ohio, the middle school gym. That's coming up in December. And don't forget, coming up next week on our program, that's October the 21st, former WWF Tag Team Champion from the Heavenly Bodies and current WWF trainer, Dr. Tommy Pritchard. Wednesday, October the 28th, the current half of the current WWF Tag Team Champions, Road Dogg Jesse James and his father, the legendary Bullet Bob Armstrong. And on Wednesday night, November the 4th, our good friend WCW referee Mark Curtis and Wrestling Perspective publisher David Skolnick. And also Wednesday, November the 18th, WWF Live at the Cincinnati Gardens here in town. And DX, Road Dogg Jesse James, and X-Pac will be in the house.
Les, on the 28th of October, of course, your birthday. Mine's the 26th of October. And I think I'm getting you a stripper in the studio that night just for your birthday.
JJ, can you make it to town for that one?
I don't know if my heart would stand it.
Wait a minute, we're not that old. You're what, 2 years younger than I am? I'll be 58.
Yeah, that's about right, yes.
About right. You're not sure why.
Yeah, you're right on.
Okay, politician. I'm going to get Matt back on the phone here for you. Ryan, are you still here? Is Ryan still with us?
Two more questions for JJ.
Hey, go ahead, Ryan. Speak up a little bit.
What are the chances that we'll see Leon White return to WCW, and when will Savage be back in the ring?
With regard to Leon, I learned a long time ago in the wrestling business to never say never. I think it's highly unlikely, but you never know. Right now, I know that there certainly are no plans. I think he's contractually tied up to the WWF and probably be there for a while. Randy, as you know, had reconstructive surgery to his knee. I mean, he was in bad shape. I mean, he had one of the major tendons, I want to say, was all severed. And he continued to wrestle for a time with the use of a brace, but it was a great risk of the whole thing, putting him into a situation where he could have been crippled. And he finally did have to have corrective surgery. And anybody that knows Macho knows that he's a very, very intense individual, both in and out of the ring, in his professional life and personal life. And he doesn't know how to do anything in moderation. And I think as part of his rehab process, he was so aggressive that he somehow inflamed the area that was being healed. It wasn't necessarily that there was an infection in there, but it got inflamed and to the point that they actually had to go back and do a second procedure to go in there and fix that. So I'm hoping we'll see the Macho Man back sometime, probably around the end of the year or the first of the year.
Does that answer your question, Ryan?
Yeah, one more quick one.
Sure.
When does Hogan's contract expire? Because I think the man's a complete waste of airtime.
This is Matt's father, I think.
Yeah.
Where's the applause button? Where's that, Joe?
Well, official WCW line, I wouldn't know what to say. I have to be objective with Hulk, and Les can understand this. Whether you like him or not, you have to recognize that he took this profession to a whole other level that no one else has ever come close. I mean, you can go back to the Gorgeous George and the Rockers and whoever you want to pick from different eras, and maybe you're comparing apples to oranges, but in the modern era, nobody has accomplished what Hulk Hogan did, and
I think the emphasis was on the word did.
I mean, I can tell you from a business standpoint, on pay-per-view buy rates, he still has a dramatic impact, positive dramatic impact. I would say, and this is again my own personal opinion, I'm not speaking as a WCW official, I would like to see him not appear as often as he does. And I think that would probably enhance his reputation, his appeal, if we didn't see him as often as we do.
I think that's one of the things today, JJ, if you don't mind me jumping in here, Ryan. We were talking about the freebies on Monday night. Of course, that is due to the ratings war. They're giving away the store, as they say, both companies. But I think that JJ will agree with me on this, Ryan, that in our business, I don't care how good you are, who you are, anybody we've said here tonight that we thought was the greatest ever, is that at some point you need a rest. You need to take a break. And I think that's what JJ's saying with, with Hogan, is that, he's being overexposed, and that a little less of him would probably elongate and give him a little more longevity in his career. Is that what you mean, Jimmy?
Yeah, I think we could have learned a lesson from the old Colonel Tom Parker, who discovered and managed Elvis Presley for all those years. And in those days, you never saw Elvis Presley on television. You didn't see him on the talk shows. The only time you saw him was the periodic tours that he did, and it was supply and demand. There was a mystique about him because you didn't see him anymore, and I think there was a lesson to be learned in that.
I think that's why Hogan was so strong when he first came back to WCW. He'd had a couple years out of the business, out of the spotlight, and he hit strong, and now I think it's if it's waning at all, it's simply because, and Jim's right, in modern day, like him or not, great technician or not, the guy is, he's done it all.
He's worked more on TV in probably the last year than he did his whole tenure with the WWF on free TV, probably.
Yeah. I would say that's a very, very accurate statement. And again, I think that does have to do with the competitive environment between the two main organizations. Sometimes you live and die by the ratings on a week-to-week basis.
Does that answer it for you, Ryan?
Yeah, Les, when are you guys coming back to Bogart?
I'll tell you the truth, we're working on some dates now, as a matter of fact. It's a matter of them finding an open date where we can get the talent. So, and of course, their primary business is bands.
Yeah.
And some of these bands have been coming into that venue for a long, long time. So it's just a matter of, us finding where we can get the top talent, and they have the open date, but we plan to do that hopefully within the next couple months anyway, Ryan.
All right, that's good to hear. You guys have a nice evening. Nice talking to you, JJ. Good luck to you and your company.
My pleasure. Les, I would like to make a point that I think it's great on Wednesday Night Main Event that you take the time to plug a lot of the independent shows. Obviously, I heard the plug for the next time the WWF is coming to town. And obviously, I don't care if anybody shows up, but certainly the other upcoming cards that you promoted, I think it's great that the independent organizations and the wrestlers that are appearing get a chance to have it known when and where they're going to be, because the old days of the regional territories are gone by the way and will never be back here, and these independent shows are, I think, the only opportunity for some of the upcoming stars and some of the people that you have at your school that you feel have potential. They can only go so far, like a baseball player that's in spring training or the batting cage. He's got to get into game situations, and these guys have got to have an opportunity to get out in front of a live audience and really see what they have. And I think it's great that you support these organizations and get the word out, and I hope the fans will go out and support them too, because these are your potential future stars of tomorrow.
Don't you think, I mentioned technical experts and good technical skills in the ring, and I think that's where we were lucky, because there were so many territories that we were able to wrestle with veterans, guys who had been in this business a long time, and win, lose, or draw, we had 15 minutes in that ring was a 15-minute education, where now I think the biggest problem with the independents, and since I've been involved, it's a little over 4 years now, is the fact that it's the blind leading the blind in so many cases, where a kid with very little experience has got another kid with very little experience, so no one actually knows where they're going or where they've been.
I believe they call it the blind leading the blind.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember back in the early 70s when I first went to Charlotte, and Johnny Heidemann and El Gaucho and Jesse James and
Pedro Godoy,
and Lee Henning, and there were more names.
Pedro Godoy was another.
Pedro Godoy was the name that was on the tip of my tongue, and like you say, you could go in and have a match and lose a match. Art Nelson was another one that had a great impact on me in those early days. And I mean, I remember sitting in the dressing room and just looking around and seeing, the Missouri Mauler and Brute Bernard, these guys that they had done it all. Harold Furpo and Rock Hunter. It was an education. You could go out and learn something every night, and there were people in wrestling in the opening matches in those days that you had a different caliber of wrestler from every match, right from the first match on the card, that the guy that was in the first match that night really had the capability of being a main eventer on any other given night. And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of depth anymore.
No, we sure, and that brings up a point. I watched your show Monday night, the Torberg kid.
Yeah.
What happened to his knee?
I talked to him last night. I've kind of been very watchful of Dale's career. I met his father, Jeff Torborg, was a Major League Baseball player. He managed the White Sox. He managed the New York Mets. He's still active today. I think he does radio, or did radio for CBS. And you see him on Fox telecasts. And Dale had tried baseball, and injury that he knew he wasn't going to make it there, and this was something that he wanted to do, and he paid his dues and spent a lot of time in Florida. But again, there weren't very many places to go, and so he came up to the power plant, and he's been there for a while. He's gifted athletically, and it was sad because it was his first opportunity Monday to really be in the national spotlight, and the maneuver that he did, he just came down in an awkward position and actually dislocated the kneecap.
Wow.
And at first the thought was that he totally blew the knee out, but the kneecap was around to one side, and they were able to take him to the hospital and pop it back in place. And he had some swelling and tore, and it was sore, but I don't think that there was some concern that he may have tore a tendon, or and he was going to have an MRI, I think, today, and I didn't get to hear the results of it. But we certainly hope that it wasn't anything very severe, because again, we desperately need
young
new talent for the future, and certainly Dale has some potential.
Well, great. Okay. Well, listen, we're going to take another break. We'll be back with our very special guest, WCW's J.J. Dillon, right after this. We're on All Sports 1360. Homer.
Back right here. AM 1360 All Sports, 1360 the Homer. 749-1360 is the number, and judging by our commercials lately, we have the Dateline and the Hustler commercials. Girls, you are allowed to call as well, so if you want to call us up and talk to us, star 1360 on Ameritech. They pick up your 35 cents, and of course 749-1360 is the normal line. So
you got it, Doc. You got it. Listen, let's jump right on the phone lines here. Let's go to line 2. We got Mike and Mason. You're on All Sports 1360. Mike, how you doing?
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
We're good. We're good.
You have me on your show.
Hey, well, thanks for being here, man.
I wanted to step back a little bit. Everybody's reminiscing, talking about current stuff. I really enjoyed you talking earlier about old times. I was fortunate enough. I grew up in North Carolina, so I got to see all the Mid-Atlantic years. And even before that, my late uncle, was either boxing commissioner or insurance commissioner in Asheville, and took me to my very first match. I believe it was about 1971 in the old Asheville Auditorium.
Wow. A Wednesday night.
If I'm not mistaken, it was Brooke Bernard and Skull Murphy and Argentino Apollo and the Briscoes and Sandy Scott, the original Mr. Wrestling. It was pretty incredible and really nice guys. And I'm not sure how he was involved, but he was one of the people that was responsible for working with the promoters to bring the wrestlers to town. So it was a nice experience. And you know, a lot of kids talk about New York baseball, going to games with their father. Well, I'd go to wrestling matches with my grandfather. That was part of what we shared in watching wrestling on Saturday mornings from the station out of Greenville, and then watching them on Saturday night from the station in Asheville. So that was pretty special.
You know, one thing I remember about that Asheville station is in a 3-station market. You talk about everyone talks about wrestling in this time period as how big it is now and how it's really gotten big, but it's always been big. And I remember because I worked in the Charlotte office and helped out with the TV there in the 70s. That Asheville station, I think it ran Mike, was it around 11:30 on Saturday night or something?
Yeah, it was rough because, you know, when you're about 7 or 8 years old, you're trying to survive through the news because you got to make it to 11:30. But now that's on WLOF. That's when it came on.
Right. But in a 3-station market, that's wrestling picked up like an 80% of the audience of the 3 stations in its hour time slot. I mean, that's how strong wrestling was in Asheville. JJ, by golly, Paul, what was his name, the promoter up there?
Oh, God, yeah.
You get is that a right kind of thing? How are you tonight, JJ?
Yeah.
Wrestling in my town. I'm glad to have you. You remember the guy's name, Mike?
My uncle's name was Alva Crowder.
No. Okay, the Paul, what was his last? I can't remember his last name. See him standing right here in front.
Yeah. And, you know, just a great gentleman, and I'm just drawing a blank too, but I can visualize the building, and we used to go up there on Wednesday nights. I remember that.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. JJ mentioned Johnny Heidemann. And Johnny Heidemann is, may not be best known for his wrestling, but inside the business, he was best known for his eating, or the amounts that he could eat. And Johnny wasn't that big a guy, considering a wrestler. He's probably, JJ, 5'8", 235, something like that.
Yeah, as hard as a rock.
Yeah, exactly. The guy used to run through the woods in work boots and run miles and miles and miles. Anyway, there was some restaurant in Asheville that was doing lobster tails, all you could eat for a certain price, whatever that price was back then. And it was on Wednesday nights. And Heidemann found out about this, and he'd go to Asheville, go early, go to that restaurant, and he would just stuff himself. And so finally, the manager of the restaurant just saw him coming in on Wednesday nights, and he said, "I noticed you're only in my restaurant on Wednesday nights." And Johnny said, "Yeah, well," he said, "I'm a wrestler." And he said, "We only wrestle here on Wednesday nights." So it was like 3 or 4 weeks, I guess, before Heidemann was back in Asheville again. And he shows up at the restaurant, and they had changed the lobster tail night Tuesday or Thursday or something. Anyway, they cut him off because I guess he was run the guy wrecked.
Well, that happened a few times. I mean, George Two-Ton Harris, Klondike Bill, there were a few guys there at that time that had the reputation for being able to do some damage to the groceries, and they had the various pitch to you win buffets logged all throughout the state. That same scenario played itself out many times where the buildings would see these guys going up and they try to put the close sign up.
Where was it? In Salisbury we used to go.
Yeah, Salisbury, right? That's right.
Yeah, that was a great buffet. Boy, my memory's not all that bad. Mike, you got any other remembrances?
Well, just a couple of points, and moving up a little
bit.
You guys had mentioned the territories. I enjoy, I'm glad to see wrestling in the spotlight now, but I really miss the days where, of course, I grew up watching Mid-Atlantic, and then when cable came around, I could see Florida and Georgia, and then I could stay up and watch WOR and watch the World Wrestling Federation from the old, they do the tapings from Allentown, and that was some pretty great stuff. And Mr. Dillon, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's great to see on TV now, but I think a lot of the people, unless you grew up in the Mid-Atlantic area, didn't get to see you, how charismatic you were back in the manager days. I was just sitting here thinking the time I was on hold, which was a while, shows how popular everybody wants to talk to you. A couple of situations that just still crack me up to this day thinking about how great you were in the situations. I think one was you could take the Dusty Rhodes elbow in the ropes and get kind of caught halfway in between and be juggling on the ropes and finally go to the floor, and it was just the greatest thing to see, and everybody would just love it. And then the other time I can remember talking about drama on TV, the situation where was the breakup of the original Horseman with Ole, and you're on TV demanding more time, and then Ole charges out on the set, and you guys go at it, and that was just like, I mean, it would set the tone, and you would be like, oh, wow, we've got to watch tomorrow and see what's going to go on. So that was pretty intense stuff.
There's a lot.
I think not to interrupt you, Les, but I think a lot of it was maybe the simplicity of it. You know, the scenarios that unfolded were not so complicated, you know, that you could sit at home and you didn't need a map to be able to follow what was going on.
Don't you think today that sometimes wrestling gets so far out there that it is tough to follow?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And, you know, unless you can relate to this too, you know, hearing this gentleman talk about going with his grandfather to the matches on a weekly basis in Asheville, you know, that's one of the things that I'm sad to go by the way, and that was the weekly matches where there were fans that would go and sit in the same seats week after week. And, if you were in a territory for any length of time, you know, you would in a while get to know these people, whether they cheered you or booed you, but you would get to know them certainly by face and many times by name. And I can't tell you the number of times, years that have gone by where I'll bump into somebody, and to me the most gratifying thing that I hear is when somebody comes up to me and says that, you know, they remember a period of time, whether it was in Amarillo, Texas, or Charlotte, North Carolina, and to make a blanket statement of, you know, I can't tell you how much enjoyment that you brought to me. I remember those times, and basically, I think that's why we work so hard. And yes, we wanted to do well financially and feed our families, but you know, years to go by, as we reflect back, I enjoyed being remembered as someone that you know, that brought some joy into someone's life, that remembers whatever I did, good or bad, with you know, with fond memories.
What do you think, Mike?
Last thing I'll say, I'll let you go. That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you guys at least remember it. It reminded me of, and this is a true story. I was in Charlotte before I moved to Ohio a few years ago for my new company I was with. I was in a country nightclub in Charlotte. This was probably about, I'd say, 1990. And I saw a gentleman walk across the floor, and he looked kind of familiar to me, and I had to think for a second. And he was having trouble walking, and he was a big person moving across the floor, and I took a good look and finally realized it was Sweet Hansen.
Wow.
And I remembered him. And I went over and shook his hand and bought him a drink and told him that, you know, and obviously he was doing, you know, he had retired and obviously was not setting the world on fire with what he made in, you know, the 70s. And I just told him that I remembered him on TV and how hard he worked. And, you know, I said, yeah, and it's too bad you didn't get more of those main eventers. I thought you looked pretty good in the ones you were in. And even reminded him I saw him against Bob Backlund one time, and I remembered. And it just really, he really seemed to appreciate it.
Well, that's a great compliment that you paid him, too, to be able to tell him that you remember how hard he worked. And, you know, a lot of guys, because the wrestling business, you don't work for a team, you know, you're basically in business for yourself. And, you know, a lot of guys didn't have financial counselors and didn't invest their money wisely even when they did have good years. And it's kind of sad that some of the great names in this profession fell on hard times, and because they did work so hard and were so unselfish in their giving, you know, many of them in their later years ended up crippled up from injuries, but I guess that's life.
As Terry Taylor says, we've all left a little bit of ourselves in every little arena across the country.
Boy, that's the truth.
Hey, we're going to have to take a break here. Hey, Mike, thank you for the remembrances. Man, that was great.
You're welcome, guys.
Hey, you're on All Sports 1360 Home. We'll be right back with J.J. Dillon after this.
We're now back on All Sports 1360 Homer, 749-1360 or star 1360 at Ameritech. Let's open the lines up. Let's go to line one. Rick from Hamilton. Rick, you're on All Sports 1360 Homer.
Hey, how you doing?
What's up, Rick?
Oh, nothing much.
Got a question for JJ?
Yeah, I was wondering what happened to Randy Savage.
I think in one of the earlier callers, and you may have missed it, asked about Randy. He had reconstructive surgery on his knee, and during the rehab process had some complications, and I think largely due to how aggressively he was attempting his own therapy in rehab, and had to have a second procedure. And I think the last update was that we expect him back probably sometime by the end of this year, first of next year at the latest.
Oh, well, see, I just tuned in. I didn't get to hear that question.
All right, you got another question?
Yeah, about Scott Hall. I mean, Scott Hall hasn't been himself lately. I was wondering what's going on with that.
Can you hear him, JJ?
No, I couldn't hear the
He
question.
said Scott Hall hadn't been himself lately. He wondered what was going on with that.
I don't know if you've been watching TV. Maybe he can figure it for himself. They say anybody that imbibes to excess risks killing some too many brain cells. And maybe that's what's happened. I don't know.
Maybe we've all risked that. We've been dropped on our heads a few times.
Yeah.
Years too. Anything else, Rick?
No, I just need to ask you a question.
All right.
Do you know who might be the major star at the wrestling match at the 31st at the Armory?
The major star?
Ricky Morton.
Al Snow in the Head. Yeah. And we're having a costume contest, too. Al and the Head are going to be the judges.
Yeah. I just want to ask you a question. When these fans go to these wrestling matches, because I've been through it last year back in September 8th, and I went and bought some tickets to a wrestling match, the WWF. And when I got the ticket, someone already had my seat, and it felt like I got ripped off. And when I argued with the guys there, it just, made me angry, and they didn't do anything about it.
You mean you bought tickets, and then when you got to the Gardens is where you went, right?
Yeah, the Cincinnati Gardens.
And someone was already in your seats?
Yeah. I tried to get some fourth seats, and there was no one there, and I tried to get them, and there was all big kinds of happening.
So, and the ushers didn't move the people out of your seats?
No, they didn't.
Well, that would be the call of the Garden, I would assume. That's
Yeah, I would certainly call that. Most of the arenas that I've been to are pretty good. Their ushering staff about having people, if they're in your seat and you paid for it, unless they can produce a ticket. And in today's computer age, there are glitches and mistakes. I mean, I've seen situations where because it isn't computer, they've printed tickets for seats that don't exist, and duplicated seats and that kind of thing. But most of the major arenas are prepared to handle those situations. So, I mean, it's unfortunate whether it was a WWF event or WCW event. Like I say, most arenas will bend over backwards to correct that situation.
Well, I went to a NWA, well, actually the WCW back in '87, and I had no problems back then in that, because I went one time and there was a match between Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo, and Barry Windham suplexed Mike Rotundo off the rope, and when he did, the ring completely broke right in half. And it took me 3 hours to build that ring, and I didn't even get home until about 2 o'clock in the morning.
You know what? They were taping that night too, weren't they?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, because rings don't break that often. It was at Cincinnati Gardens too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there. I remember. Yeah, I remember.
That was right around the time the Morton Flair deal was going on in NWA, right around 86, 87.
Yeah.
Well, Rick,
I want to ask about that because why did it change from the NWA to WCW at that time?
why did it change from NWA to WCW? Well, the NWA, or the National Wrestling Alliance, now when JJ and I were talking, when we were tag team partners in the Carolinas back in the early 70s, the Mid-Atlantic promotion, the Crockett promotions, were a member of the NWA. As a matter of fact, NWA was a group of wrestling promoters, not only in the United States, but Canada, Mexico, Japan, Korea, Australia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they started, when WWF started their big move to take over the country in '85, a lot of the smaller promotions went under. There's still an NWA today, but initially what we're getting to here is the Crockett organization, or the Mid-Atlantic organization, was the last real stronghold of the NWA. And so when he sold out to Turner Broadcasting in Atlanta, then it was all merged under one, and then finally they dissolved the NWA as far as they were concerned and made the world champion the WCW champion. Am I right on this so far, JJ?
Yeah, I think initially in the beginning when Turner first bought Channel 17 and made it a superstation, it was actually Georgia Championship Wrestling, and then as cable television expanded and it became a national show, I think they wanted to get away from the regional name, and so evolved Georgia Championship Wrestling to World Championship Wrestling. And you were correct that they were Crockett was a member of the NWA, and actually there was a separate regional promotion in Georgia itself at one time that were also NWA members.
So that's there's your. There is still an NWA, but it's there's more smaller organizations now. They're the whole. Well, actually, Howard Brody, who's the president, is based in Florida. Dennis Coraluzzo, who I think is Secretary of Treasury or something, in New Jersey. But now, Rick, most of your NWA members are smaller independent promotions. It doesn't have any. But when JJ and I first broke into professional wrestling, NWA was the power. When Ric Flair first won his first World Heavyweight title, it was the NWA World Heavyweight title.
And they used to have an annual convention that really was a big deal. And if you were a headline wrestler in the profession, if you were somehow invited just to be in Vegas or wherever the meeting took place, I mean, that kind of was a measure of your status. It was a big deal to be able to, and Sam Muchnick was the president for like 25 years.
Right. It was usually the first weekend in August in Vegas, I think, when they had the NWA convention. Because
of course, I remember you used to go to all those meetings, and of course you'd leave me at home because obviously I didn't have the stature that you did. But that never bothered me. I was never offended by that. It didn't bother me that I had to keep going and wrestling in single matches because you went to the NWA convention.
Speaking of status, now I'll be down to wash your car the first thing in the morning. Rick, you got any more questions for JJ? I guess Rick's checked out on us. I'm going to tell, before we get out, this story's sticking in my mind. We were talking about camaraderie earlier, and it's a human interest story, and I want to tell this about my friend J.J. Dillon, and we were talking about the camaraderie of the business back when we were wrestling together. We made a trip to Richmond, Virginia. Seems to come into play here all the time. I don't know why. Anyway, we were traveling with, there were four of us, but the third guy was a tremendous gentleman and a tremendous wrestler by the name of Luther Lindsay. And we got to Richmond that night, and Luther was sick. I don't remember the flu, virus, whatever it was, but to the point where Luther could not wrestle. Joe Murnick, whose son is still in the business, still works for WCW, was the promoter of record. And he came into the dressing room, and he said, well, Luther told Joe he couldn't wrestle. So he said, well, somebody's going to have to double up. Well, back in those days, when if you doubled up and filled in for somebody, you usually got half of what they were going to get, plus your own payoff is what we called it. So before anyone else could say anything, because Luther was a good friend to all of us, and like I say, a tremendous class act and a gentleman, JJ spoke up, and because Luther had a farm and a family, and needed the financial income as same as the rest of us, JJ spoke up and said, Joe, I'll fill in the spot. And he said, but here's the stipulation, here's the condition, that you give Luther his full payoff as though he had wrestled. And you know what, my friend, I don't remember what, 1974, maybe 73, I don't even remember when that was, but I've never forgotten that. And man, there's not a lot of guys like that around anymore.
Yeah, I had forgotten that story, and I remember that night, and Luther came up to me after and we used to get paid cash in those days. He'd sign a receipt and he'd have an envelope with cash in it, and he came up to me, and it's like, wanted me to take the envelope because I'd gone out there in his place, and this was something, a very private thing. It took place in the dressing room, and there was no ulterior motives. It's just he was someone who had been very good to me, that had been a big name in the profession. And Luther had a real bad car wreck like a year before I went there and before I met him. And I used to see pictures of him in his heyday, and he was a big, powerful man and really a wonderful, wonderful human being. And I had learned a lot just being around him. And so to me, it was no big deal. And it's nice that you remember that night, because it's things like that I look back on with fond memories. And
What's one of the things that makes me care about you, my friend? And Luther told great Stu Hart stories, the best ever, right? We got to take another break. We're going to be back with more J.J. Dillon stories, Stu Hart stories, and anything else. We're here on All Sports 1360. Homer.
To relieve that pain, which will be better for me, but not so enjoyable for all of you.
Mr. Sacco right there as we come back here on the Wednesday night main event. Just a little bit of time left, 749-1360. Special guest, of course, James J. Dillon here, former manager of the Four Horsemen. And JJ, I want to start out with a question real quick for you. We were talking about the old days and some of the old memories. And they had brought up some of the times when you and Dusty Rhodes would fight and stuff like that. And there's a guy by the name of Magnum TA back in 85 and 86. And I was wondering, when he got hurt, was he pretty much in the middle of on his way to being, I guess, the NWA version of a Hulk Hogan type? You know, the big star, because he was just it looked like he was on the rise right when he got hurt.
Certainly. He was a very gifted athlete. I mean, he was blessed with size. He had the height. He had the physical size. He had that rugged good looks and charm, and the men respected him. The women loved him, and like you said, we will never know how far that potential would have taken him. But right as he was just about to emerge to that level was when the tragic accident took place.
Because I'd always wondered that, you have the guys in the WWF like The Rock had jumped up to, intercontinental title status. Now they're getting the big pop, and they were probably one of the top 4 players in that organization. And TA was always the United States champion, and he had just started wrestling matches with Ric Flair, and then all of a sudden the accident happened.
Yeah, real tragedy.
We're going to BA in Norwood right now. Speaking of Magnum TA, we got BA in Norwood.
Hey, BA, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Good.
Great show. I had 2 questions for you. Recently, the ECW brought back a couple guys named Jack Victory and Rod Price, and at one time they had been in the old WCW, the World Class Championship Wrestling down in Texas. And at one time they were associated with a manager named Skandar Akbar. And I was wondering if either one of you guys knew what had become of Skandar Akbar.
JJ, do you know?
No. Last I heard, he was settled somewhere around Dallas. He had made his home there for a long time, and he was a good guy, class act, Skandar.
Yeah,
it's been many years since I've seen him. His name was Jim Weaver, I think.
Yeah. So he's no longer in wrestling then?
I think he is involved. I don't know about currently, right this moment we're talking, but I think back last year I saw his name connected with a couple of the independent promotions or an independent promotion in that area.
Right. Okay. There have been several attempts to try and revive wrestling, the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, the Von Erichs.
Yeah, the old Sportatorium. I used to run around down there.
Try to capture that, and because he lived there and really he was a student of the profession and always had a pretty good mind, it just seemed that they always tapped into him, but whether it was lack of financial backing or whatever, none of those ventures ever really got off the ground.
Oh, okay. The other question I had was sort of related to that. Of course, the big 3 right now, as I understand it, I'm a big wrestling fan, and I watch the ECW, and I watch the WCW, and the WWF. Those are the big 3. And I know a lot of people, the wrestlers, they jump around in these organizations. To me, they're like other professional athletes. They're just free agents, and they can sign for whatever they want. What I want to know is, do you guys go out and do you kind of recruit out of these smaller organizations? You had a couple of callers before talk about how the NWA was broken down into smaller factions now. They've got this MCW thing in Nashville.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, give you an example, because JJ's aware of this too. Two of the guys that currently wrestle for me in the HWA, who I've trained, Terry Taylor, one of who's with WCW, one of JJ's associates, and a tremendous wrestler in his own right. Exactly. Okay. Well, he's involved with the talent. He saw a tape of these 2 guys, so he met them last November when they were when Nitro was done here, just to get to meet them. Then the following month in December, he had me bring them to Knoxville to the Civic Coliseum, and he put him in a dark match. And what I mean by that is before Nitro went on the air, to get a look at him, with a possibility of signing him to a contract. And they need a little more seasoning, a little better conditioning. So, of course, it was back to the drawing boards. But, of course, that is the answer, yes. And I'm sure, I know when JJ was with WWF a number of years back, and he was involved with talent, I think, more at that point, I remember him telling me that he had tapes and pictures coming across his desk of every bodybuilder, bouncer, truck driver, and musclehead in the world. Am I right, JJ?
Yeah, a few ex-football players thrown in there. And, the sad part is that probably in that whole nicks. There are a few diamonds in the rough, but I always took the position that it's a very demanding profession, and if there was someone out there that wanted to make this their life's work and had the ability, that somehow they were going to persevere, they were going to make the sacrifices until someone noticed that they were there, and if it was meant to be, it would be. It wasn't something that you go out and actively recruit to find.
B.A., I'm going to cut you off, man. We're about time to get. JJ, this 2 hours has gone too fast, man. But listen, I guess I'm going to see you. I'm going to talk to you before that. I guess I'm going to see you toward the end of November for the Mark Curtis thing in Knoxville.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that, and I think it's a great thing that we're all coming together that night to kind of salute him for all that he's given us, and just to be able to be there in person and to let him know how much we care about him, and that he's in our thoughts and our prayers, that he beats this thing and gets well and gets back to the ring one of these days.
And when we're talking about class acts, my friend, you're one of the best.
Well, I appreciate it, and our friendship has endured all these years because the feeling is the same on my end, and there aren't a lot of people, because this can be a very tough business, and along the way I can only count the really true friends and friendships that I've developed on my two hands. And
they're running me out of here. I hate to cut you off, because I like hearing about me. They're running me out of here, brother. Thanks for being with us.
All right, let's do it again sometime.
I love you, brother. Be in touch with you soon. Les Thatcher for Dr. Love, Patrick Black, and our producer, Joe. We're out of here on Wednesday night, Main Event.